Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Thilan Legierse. Close.
Yes, very close.
But not perfect. But Thilan is just one of those fascinating people that you meet and you think, wow, this story has to be shared with more people, because it's a fascinating story, first of all. But secondly, I think some of the things that she has done, the expertise that she has, is something that I think many people in business may need at one time or another, or may wish they had that as a resource. So Thilan is really a gift to you as a resource. She began it with a career as an attorney with the United Nations, looking at war crimes and negotiating various events there. A very high stress, obviously very important role for people's lives and the future of what was happening in communities. And now she is residing in Australia and does executive coaching, teaches how to have those very difficult conversations when the stakes are very, very high, and teaches negotiations. So that's a big overview of Thilan. And in the little bit of time I've had to speak with her, have just grown to have a tremendous respect for her perspective and what it is that she brings to business. So Thilan, I'm excited to share you, and I just want you to tell a little bit about what got you to where you are, why war crimes, and then what your practice is today.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, Lois, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you, and I highly respect you, and I think I can learn a lot from you. So yes, what brought me where I am today? I guess I am at that stage in my career that I feel like all the pieces of the puzzle have fallen together. And so, yes, so when I started my career, I was actually first a barrister, as we call it, a barrister in the Netherlands. So when I was 24, I was thrown into, Supreme Court situations and very difficult cases. And that was just a really good foundation for me to learn all those skills about negotiating, communicating, persuading people, and instead of being a lawyer who's just fighting a battle all the time, try to be collaborative. And then I went to work for the United Nations for 12 years, and like you were saying, in war zones and in countries where there were a lot of human rights violations, like Cambodia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and at the International Criminal Tribunal. It was just, and then when I came to Australia, I eventually became a mediator and an HR manager. And so I guess at this point in my career, I just feel it's all come together, as in, I have seen the worst of communication, the worst of conflict, the worst of leadership. And I have seen some really wonderful leaders who gave hope to people who didn't have a lot of hope. And I just really believe that the world would be a better place if we would all communicate better, and if we would have leaders who would lead by example, and you know how would you say, smooth the path and help others get the best out of themselves. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it does make a lot of sense. And, as I listen to you, Thilan, um, the worst of leaders and the best. So let's take a look at both. I think it's easy for the worst to come out when situations are not good. War is never a good situation. And you're probably, I'm guessing, always weighing different values, different priorities, because it's war. So when you say under that condition, what makes for a worst leader?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because what I might consider a bad leader, someone else might consider a very good leader. So I am very aware of that. First of all, I think the 5 years that I was an attorney, already kind of set me up to the understanding that I personally believe there is no black and white. There's lots of gray areas. There's no only good people and only evil people. That's my belief. I remember that I went when I was in the Netherlands practicing. I had to go and visit someone who had murdered his wife. He was in his 70s, and his wife had Alzheimer's or dementia. I don't remember the exact details. And that was the first time that I met a murderer and realized, oh my gosh, this is a human being who is at his wits' ends because he's killed his wife. And so I think that I just want to say that there is no black and white. But then if you look at war zones, or if you look at dictatorships, from my perspective, a bad leader is a leader who doesn't take the interest of all its people, and is like focusing on favorites, and gives certain people a lot of rights, and does give other people no rights at all, and is someone who is kind of encouraging that system and is using power for his or her own benefits, and uses influence in a way, instead of getting the best out of people, in a way to help incite people, and that people will do things that they may regret later, but at that moment they get swept away with the bigger thing. And so that's what I would consider a bad leader. Someone else who is a political affiliate of that leader might not see that as a bad leader, but I really believe that we should use things for good and not for bad. And when you talk to victims of human rights violations, of war crimes, it's just immense suffering. And if you allow others to do things that cause immense suffering for another human being, I consider you as a bad leader.
Got it. So immense suffering. Um, you know, I think today, just removing for a moment from the discussion about war crimes, we see that also today in terms of in the workplace, for example. We have, and it may not be the CEO at the top of the organization, but somewhere, somehow, there's a culture that diminishes people. It discourages them. Their spirit goes down, 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 and they become less than who they are. And it's a similar situation of poor leadership, not with the same amount of degree of hurt, certainly, but hurt still that some people never recover from.
Absolutely, and I think that's a brilliant observation, because that's exactly what I see. And actually, just reminds me of a keynote I wrote about comparing war zones with workplaces and seeing the exact same thing happening. And that is, like, I would say, um, dehumanizing people, othering people. And so when I work with teams in conflict, or organizations in conflict, that's exactly what you were saying is happening. People feel that they are not treated equally, they are humiliated, they are treated less than other people. And even if they don't dare to speak up, they become very resentful. And I don't know about you, but as a mediator, when I work with people, they often are taking antidepressants, they are seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Here in Australia, they take, we call it work cover, they take sick leave based on the fact that they have been bullied or harassed. All those terms are used. And exactly the same as I saw as a human rights lawyer, is happening, but on a different scale.
So, Thielen, when you were working with those situations, let's start with the war zone because that's so dramatic. It's maybe easier to speak about. And then let's come back to the corporation. Were there things that could be done that you saw that could begin to create a healing within people's spirits? Or was the hurt and the pain so extensive it was not something that perhaps it wasn't your role because you were an attorney, but did you see people being able to adapt and push through that? And what would help them if they could?
Oh, of course, Lois, that's such a good question and such difficult to respond to because of course I've got different countries on my mind. But first of all, um, I have seen, and also when I was an attorney, I worked with refugees from lots of different countries. So um, I have seen immense resilience in human beings, things that I didn't think was possible. But also, for instance, when I was working in Cambodia, what I found was that almost everyone that I encountered was traumatized by what had happened during the Pol Pot regime when millions of people had been killed. And so, what I'll never forget is that one of my Cambodian colleagues, and he passed away last year, um, he and I were driving somewhere in a village, and then he said, "Oh, Thilan, look at that guy there," and I, looked, and he said, "Oh, that guy, he killed my uncle." And I was like, "What?" I was such a privileged Dutch lawyer that I had to kind of get used to the concept that someone who killed someone else 20 years ago was still walking in the community, and there had been no justice done to there was complete immunity. And so when you talk about healing, I think at that time the healing wasn't really, this was, I'm talking about 1997. The healing wasn't really possible because there was still that injustice. The UN then set up a tribunal, and I won't go into too many details, but I I personally think there was still not really justice done. So I think that's one of the big things, that when there's no justice done for that generation, it's very difficult to heal. But the next generation, which is the young generation now in Cambodia, is very different because they haven't really experienced the same trauma that their parents have experienced, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make a lot of sense. I think generation time does begin to heal perhaps, or at least the memory becomes more distant. So now you live off of the stories perhaps, but it's not real in your own life. So let's go to corporate situations. Now, with wounded people within corporations, the pain that sometimes we see there, what do you see in terms of the possibility of healing? Do people heal or do they leave?
I hope and I aim for people to heal. So when I work with teams that are in conflict, I really work with the entire team or the entire organization, but also with the individual people, because you can't treat everyone the same. So some people will be able to move on quicker than other people. But often when I do the mediation, I start with doing some coaching around, well, what is it like for you, or what's the benefit for you in holding on to that grudge or holding on to that fear, and what could happen for you if you could let go, not saying that that person is right and that that person did the right thing, but just acknowledging that it's keeping you hostage, the anger, the resentment. And so for me, mediation, a team facilitation and coaching is about empowering people. So I leave teams in a better state than when I come into it, and make people aware that there's these group processes, but there's also your individual processes and your individual responsibility. Because there's one thing at pointing at the leaders, and leadership does this and leadership does that, but everyone has a role to play in a team, and you can't just only blame leadership. And sometimes I say things like, you need to speak up, you need to empower yourself, and you need to get out of that victim mode, because it's not bringing you anything. And not maybe always what people want to hear, but sometimes what people need to hear. And I'm not saying that there's no victims, and that there are definitely, but sometimes people, in my eyes, too quickly settle for that victim mentality, and then don't take back their power, which they often can, whether it's in legal ways or in practical ways. And also having those courageous conversations and giving people feedback, or your leader feedback, and knowing that people will often say to me, oh, that would be a career limiting move. But often it's not, it's in our heads. And often when you have open and honest conversations, it can lead to change, also from people who are higher than you.
So, the process that you walk people through to help them heal, what is it that you do? What kind of a process do you walk people through? By the way, Thilan has a remarkable piece on having difficult conversations, and she has it available on her website. We'll put it in the show notes for you who are listening so you can have access to it. But it's really summarizes a lot of her experience and her work as a negotiator, and you may appreciate and enjoy it. So you've put a lot of thought into these conversations and these relationships. So when you work with people, do you have a process that you walk them through so they really can heal?
Yeah, so the process is very much starting with people to, so I'm talking now about teams in conflict. So the process is that in first of instance, it's working with individuals, and sometimes in a group setting, and to understand for people what is underneath all this conflict. First of all, what are triggers for them? So what can be, a hot button that if somebody pushes it, it goes off and they can't really control themselves anymore. So if we understand what are our triggers, we can deal with them better. The second thing that I do is kind of help people, I call it map out a conflict. So when there is a conflict, what is actually underneath it? So for instance, if I just make something really silly, the conflict is about that certain people want to something and other people's don't, and it's escalated, then is it about that something, or is it much deeper? And often when you dive into the conflict, you find that there are certain needs, things that are essential for people that are not being met, certain values, their own moral compass that is compromised, or their identity, how they see themselves. So I help them to kind of see, okay, you think this conflict is about this, but is it really about that? Or is there other stuff? And then once they find that out, I say, okay, so let's have open and honest conversations. So I put people together. Sometimes it's 30 people, sometimes 50 people, sometimes it's two, and say, this is scary. And I often use Winston Churchill. I don't know if that's still political correct, but it is, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. And courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So I put people together and I say, you're going to have open and honest conversations. And I'm going to guide you through this in a safe way. I have people sign confidentiality agreements so they know that they can be as safe as possible, because it's an artificial safe place, because they don't trust each other. And then they have those open conversations. And as a mediator, I really try to go to the pain points. I feel sometimes a bit like a doctor with a wound. Instead of putting a plaster on it, I open the wound, I scrape all the all the rotten stuff out of it, and then I put a new bandage on and say, let's just talk about it, and so understand from each other's perspective where you're coming from. And you don't have to agree. And so then when they do that, that's when the healing starts. And as a mediator, when the real stuff comes out, that's when people can shift, and that's when healing can start. But often what happens when leaders try to do this, they don't want to go to the difficult stuff, so they do it very quickly and superficial, and then the healing can't start because people haven't really been able to share their main pain points, their real issues. And once that is done, the next stage is, okay, knowing what you know now, how can you move forward? And then that is all about, for them, because they need to make a decision. Do I want to move forward, or do I want to stay stuck in where I am, being angry at you, or feeling I've been victimized or I've been treated wrong? And so when they are able to move forward, most people are, because as human beings, we want to collaborate, we want to work together, we want peace and harmony, most of us. And then it is, okay, so what can you do specifically from both sides or from all sides? And what do you want to commit to? And so I leave them with, often in writing, they write it themselves, like what they want to commit to, and then I follow up and I make sure that, they don't fall back into their old patterns. And so that's, in a nutshell, my process.
So, what percentage of, I agree with you, people generally want to heal. What percentage would you say don't want to make that commitment to take that next step towards healing?
um, I find that over the hundreds of mediations I have done, that I've actually only once stopped a mediation, because I felt that one person was not genuine, and that that person was not wanting to move forward, was pretending to want to move forward. And I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but it's general people who have some kind of personality disorder. Um, and I wrote a book about conflict resolution, and I said, when you're a psychopath, a sociopath, or a narcissist, and you can't have empathy, that's really then, those, and you don't have remorse, then those people can't really move forward. And then there's sometimes people who, because we tell ourselves stories, and in conflict you've been telling the story for a long, long time. So if you're so stuck in that victim mode, there's some people, who need time to kind of heal. Some people can let go easier than other people. But I think on average, everyone, maybe not the same, as some people make a whole jump, but people move forward. And sometimes the mediation or the process brings clarity, and think, well, if this is the way things work here, I need to take the consequences and I need to move on. Because I don't know about you, Lois, but I have been in situations where I thought, you know what, this is not my thing. I feel I'm banging my head against the wall, and this is taking all my life energy, and this doesn't really sit with my values, and I need to move on. So I feel we also have a decision to make ourselves. But in general, people want to move on, like I said. And they call it a miracle of mediation, because sometimes it's scary. You walk in and people are really, really aggressive and very defiant. And, I can feel the energy. It's all very toxic. And then after the mediation, they walk out and they are exchanging recipes, and they are chatting about their private lives. And I'm like, how did this happen in 2.5 hours? But again, it's that we don't actually like normally conflict, because we're hardwired to get along with people. Because in the old days, if we would have conflict and we were living in tribes, our life would be in jeopardy, and we could be kicked out of the tribe, and we would die. So most of us, there's a few exceptions, but most of us don't like conflict and are happy to be able to move on.
You know, as I listen to you, Thilan, you are such a gracious spirit. You're so open, and so I think of times I've been in very difficult conflict situations, and you can feel threatened yourself sometimes. But you present yourself as this very kindly person. And so, do people sometimes take advantage of that, or do you find that that helps you with your negotiation because it can also create that safety net that people need? But do you feel more threatened at times because of it?
Um, I don't think I feel threatened anymore at times. I have, during the times that I worked for the UN, I have been in situations where I felt a bit scared. And sometimes I just make a joke because, for instance, I have had recently a few times that I worked with what you Americans would say abrasive leaders. I love that word. And who can't help but I come in to help them, but they see me as the enemy, and they, don't like my guts or whatever. They're just really full on. And so I know now to step back and to know that this person is actually quite threatened by me, and for me to gain this person's trust, I need to make clear that I'm there to help them, but I also need to be very putting up my boundaries. So I say to leaders, you are crossing the line, you are being very disrespectful. Or I don't like to use the word disrespectful because to me that is like a vague term. But I would say, and I always use observations. Um, I observe that you're being very, you're using threatening language. And how do you think that's working? Is that working for you? Because from my perspective, it's not really working. And actually, and I always make a joke about it, but I say I've actually, negotiated with Khmer Rouge commanders. So if you're trying to, intimidate me, that's not going to work. And then people are a bit like, oh, and then I say, I'm here to help you. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying, but I'm giving you feedback that no one else dares to give you. And so I'm doing that out of respect for you, because everyone else is saying these things behind your back. But I am telling you what I have observed. And that often just helps people to completely change.
What have we not talked about that is really important to talk about, to share with the audience? Our time is almost up, Thilan, and I just want to make sure that important things are covered.
Phew, I think the thing as leaders is like my mom used to say to me, because I'm the eldest, like, you know, you need to be the eldest and the most grown up. When I was having a fight with my sister, who was 2.5 years younger and much more feisty than I was in her fighting. And so I think with leaders is we need to be the grown-ups in the rooms, and we need to let go of our ego and just really use some empathy to understand what's happening for other people who might be, reacting over the top, or might be too much in victim mode, or might be, screaming or saying things that is triggering you. But just to kind of say, okay, let's take a step back from this situation and look what is happening here. And often what I find is that leaders then get so caught up in the moment that they don't take that step back. And I think a good leader role models that just to have that empathy and say, okay, just the yesterday I was asked to help with a leader, and another leader had yelled, and that other leader had then been told off. And I just sometimes people yell, okay, just like, just instead of writing a warning, a disciplinary sanction, just try and have a conversation with that person and say, hey, like you said, it's really difficult times for all of us now. Let's just try and give people a chance, and then have a conversation, and then in just to say, hey, in hindsight, that didn't really work what you did there, but I understand it. Instead of going full in and saying, I'm the boss and you do this. And I don't know if you agree, but that that can help solve a lot of tension in work.
It is easy to go to writing up somebody, taking notes and say, this is where you did this wrong and put it in the record. That's easy to do. To go to the person and have an honest conversation and to reconcile the situation, that takes bold courage, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes we need the help to understand how to do that because does take so much courage and energy. And everybody gets tired, everybody has stress, and so we don't always do it, but it's the better, the wiser of the solutions.
Yeah, and that's why I created that easy, peasy, difficult conversation formula, and I've used it with over 1,000 leaders, as in like how do you prepare for it and how do you have it in a way that it is a useful and effective way of communicating. Because to be honest, I am where I am now, but I wasn't like that when I started being a leader when I was 27 or something. So it is a journey, but the more you practice, the better you get at things. So I'm not expecting
I think
people to.
that's true. And I think the other piece, Thielen, is those of us who have gone and started really working and have an effective way of working with clients do so because of experience and what people have taught us, right? We
Yeah,
didn't get born with this wisdom. We learned
no,
it as we observed, we watched, people had advice for us. And so I think there's also that sense that if we're strong and we're a leader, we should be able to figure it out. But the truth is the really great leaders generally have had somebody who's guided them, directed them along the way. And, so often that analogy is made, you wouldn't play soccer without a coach, but we try to run big businesses or manage a lot of money sometimes and people without that. And we don't have a way of reflecting and sorting if we're making the best decisions.
absolutely, and that I so agree with that. And what I find as a coach is that a lot of leaders are also very lonely and very, they want to have integrity, so they don't discuss their challenges or their issues with people. And they, like you say, they think they have to figure it out all by themselves. And that just puts so much pressure on them that when you coach people. I was actually on Friday, um, my client said, "Oh my gosh, I was so looking forward to the conversation with you because I finally have found someone I can trust and be real with." And yeah, I took it as a compliment because exactly you're in that role, but you're only human, and we all need to have that moment we can be vulnerable and just to be like, hey, like you say, reflect about things. And I could have done that better. I could have done this different. And how can I, improve on that? And give yourself some empathy as well. Be kind to yourself
Give
because
yourself some empathy. I love that. So, Thielen, our time is up. And for those of you who are listening, we will have information about Thielen and in the show notes so you can get in contact with her if you like. And if you have trouble, certainly let us know. We'll be glad to connect you. And in that will also be her website, which if you visit, you can download her easy peasy difficult communications, which is a lovely piece that you will enjoy having at your fingertips, actually. So, Thielen, thank you so much for your time. And for those of you who are listening to Building My Legacy podcast today, thank you for being with us. And please remember to visit us at buildtomorrow.com. Thank you. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell button above. Leave comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And visit our other social media links as well. Thanks much.